Good evening all, and welcome. The infamous Men in Black, aliens, and UFOs. Are they real? Or just the stuff of legend and television and movies? Well, let's see what you make of this video. Perhaps you might see things in a different light. But for now, it's time to get comfortable. Grab onto your black-trimmed hats and let the darkness take control. Before I start my story, I'd like to say that I'm a complete skeptic and question everything and anything supernatural. I think extraordinary claims should always require extraordinary evidence. Even to this day, I will never be able to empirically prove what I've experienced. I'm currently 26 years old. This happened on June 16th, 2007. I remember it vividly. It was immediately embedded into my long-term memory when it all happened. In psychology, I believe they refer to these events as flashbulb memories. I was living in my parents' home at the time. It was a pretty stormy night. The wind was gusting slightly more than usual, and rain was coming down violently. Your typical crackles of thunder and lightning. I was playing WoW at the time, enjoying the idea that I had a legitimate excuse to not go out and do anything. I was about to finish one of the longest chain quests in the game, and boom, the internet goes out. I try for about half hour, anxiously, to get the internet to work, but as you guessed, nothing. I head to my room, frustrated. Here I am, home alone, with no internet, and irritated as hell. My parents at the time were out at a work-related event, and I remember lying on my bed just staring at the ceiling, turning my head to look at my old retro alarm clock that read 06:18 p.m. When I heard 3 knocks, I immediately sprung up, my eyes wide open, startled as hell. I crawled to my window that faced the front door and heard 3 more knocks again. I peek outside my window and see that there are 3 tall men dressed in your typical FBI-looking suits. One had what appeared to be a folder or file or something. Another, what I have believed to be a Geiger counter, and the other was beating on my door with a huge fist. I head to the door, not really thinking much of it. I honestly thought that they were just church people soliciting their beliefs. I open the door, and the one man nearest the door that was knocking greets me in a very monotone voice, pulls out a badge, and says that him and his colleagues need to check the water source from the house's faucet. I asked them a bunch of questions. It turns out that they were in fact the FBI, and someone had allegedly tried to poison the city's water. I called my parents to let them know what was going on, and they okayed the situation. The guys in the suits didn't even check the water in my house. They had some other group of government guys show up and check. I tried to ask them if there was a motive or if it was a terrorist or whatever it could be. They simply said they couldn't talk about it in detail. When out of nowhere, all the lights in the house go out. It's pitch black. The guys in suits tell everyone to stay calm. They think it's just a power outage. The guys taking water samples turn on their flashlights. As one of them does so, it flashes over the tallest of the suited men. I see a reflection from his face, almost as if there were metal from under it. The guy with the flashlight quickly directs the light elsewhere, when a moment later the guy with the flashlight says, "Sir, it has begun." The suited guy with the Geiger counter turns it on. The thing just starts going haywire. And not 3 seconds later, it felt as if I were being pulled into a million different directions. I couldn't see anything. At first, it was just excruciating pain. I thought it was the process of being disintegrated alive when out of nowhere I see nothing but white. I literally thought that I was in heaven. A man appears to me and smiles, swings his arm in an inviting gesture, as if I were entering a ballroom dance or a party. I tried to walk, but nothing. Then the white room gets sucked into itself and I see my life flash before my eyes, and I see everything. Disneyland at 5, my first kiss at 15, watch 911 happen on TV, with my mum and my dad, everything. I see the Earth suspended in space. I'm watching Earth from above, and I fall. I feel it. Heart racing, I'm numb and in disbelief. I see the ground getting closer and closer, and I know this is it. I know I'll die. But before I hit the ground, I hear the monotoned voice of the suited man say in my head, "Do not," and then a white, static noise. No matter what. I woke up in my bed, with cold sweats and panic. I freaked out and ran downstairs to find my parents cooking dinner. I ran back upstairs to see that it was 6:22 p.m. I was relieved to find out it was a dream. But it gets creepy. I go back downstairs and ask my parents when they got home. They told me they'd been home as it was their day off. I asked how the company event went, and they said it was last week. I asked them what time I fell asleep. They told me they didn't know I was asleep. I go to my computer and find that my WoW account was logged in and where I left off before the internet went down. I checked for my computer and the date. It was the 23rd. I have literally no memory of a full week. I tried to recall what had happened in my dream, but it was a blur. I go back upstairs and see that it looked like someone went through my closet. I searched and freaked out. The exact same Geiger counter the alleged FBI agent was holding was in my closet. I've never told anyone about this until now. I still have the Geiger counter and don't know what to do with it. I know this sounds crazy, but I've spent the last decade trying to piece things together. I just live day by day as an ordinary person, hoping they don't return. This happened in the mid-90s in the summer. I was around 6 or 7, and my brother was around 11 or 12. Not quite a year earlier, my brother started telling my parents he was being followed by a triangle in the sky while waiting for the school bus. After a few days of this, my dad went out with him to see what was going on, and they both came rushing back inside panting. They didn't tell me too much to keep from scaring me. Sometime in the next few days, the local paper puts a front-page article about a big, flying triangle going over the nearby town. Hundreds of witnesses, and a few pictures of the lights as it was night. My mum cut the article out and kept it near the fireplace. So going back to that summer, we had this house down a little dirt road pretty removed from people, and while we had some neighbours, we rarely saw other traffic. My mum and I were sitting in the living room, and I was helping her fold laundry while MASH was playing on the TV. My dad and brother were out at the store for something, so it was just the two of us. I should point out that my mother does not get scared easily by anything but horror movies. She used to backpack in heavily wooded forested areas, known for its moose and wolf populations before getting more involved into the medical field, and ended up as an EMT. I was not accustomed to seeing her frightened, so out of nowhere, this pristine, black, classic-looking car pulls up into our driveway. No dirt anywhere. Both doors open up, and out step these two men wearing all black suits and shiny shoes. Without looking around or pausing, they made their way to our front door. My mum scoops me up, ducks me around the corner into the kitchen while shh in me. I say ducks because she grabbed me so fast I barely had time to blink before I was tucked under her sneaking form. She ran me all the way back to the back door, where we have our washing machine and second bathroom. The door to the bathroom is immediately across the back door, but buried behind baskets and clothing. She effortlessly tossed all that crap aside and bolts us both into the bathroom with one arm around me and the other pulling the doorknob like it was holding us from falling. She was so hysterically scared. She was crying, and spit was coming from the side of her mouth. I asked her who they were, but she just clamped my mouth with her hand. The rest of the day is a blur. The next time I recall remembering bringing this up was the next day. I asked again who they were, and she told me to be quiet. I kept bugging, but she kept telling me to shut up, which is very unlike her. When she finally said something in response, she had no memory of it at all. I felt lonely and a bit cheated. Both of my parents also somehow forgot about the triangle object after my brother saw it and the paper talking about it, and of course I couldn't find it. About 10 years later, I found that article and right away showed my family, and they acted as if they had never forgotten. They recalled the whole thing without issue until I brought up the men in the cars. That is something that I only appear to remember. I'm a 17-year-old living in Darwin, Australia. I frequently have sporadic episodes of insomnia. I've deduced this to overall stress and anxiety. I mean, look at the state of the world, can you blame me? Despite this, I can recall troubles, sleep deprived from either nightmares or just general restlessness since I was a kid, so keep that in mind. My first encounter was on a camping trip with my grandmother to a dam reserve 3 hours from our town. During the holiday and weekends, families spent their times fishing, hiking, and doing other recreational activities. But during the week, virtually no one was there. So sometimes my grandma would take my brother and I for little excursions. I was 7 or 8 at the time, living in rural New South Wales. This time my brother didn't want to come, so it was just my grandma and me. The camping spot overlooked the water. Dead grey silver trees lined the shore. I remember very little about the trip, other than this experience. We were in our swags or sleeping bags, looking at the sky. The lack of light pollution meant that the stars shone incredibly bright. My grandma was dozing off when I first saw the shooting star fly by over the Southern Cross. I nudged her to tell her. "That's cool," she said, closing her eyes again. I saw another but decided not to wake her, then another and another. I woke her and she stayed up long enough to see a whole meteor shower. She joked, saying she nearly missed it because she didn't believe me. After 10 minutes, the shooting stars stopped, and she closed her eyes for the last time that night. I stayed awake. I was just pumped that I had seen something so incredible. Then after failing to count stars, I saw a little orb of light appear on the left of the Southern Cross, bright white with a blue lining around the edge, about a quarter size of the full moon just sitting there. I'd heard about UFOs from my granddad and older brother talking about them from living in Alice Springs, but wasn't completely sure what one was at this point. Hell, I didn't even know that UFO was an acronym, or that they had any affiliation with aliens. A minute or two of hovering stationary, it sort of started to slide left further, then sped up, and finally darted off, leaving a thin light trail, akin to the shooting star. Then, with a quiet crack, it disappeared. That was the first and only time I had ever seen a UFO. I didn't think much of it, but now I find it fascinating. Whether it had any relation to extraterrestrials was beyond me. The second experience was a much closer encounter with something that happened between 3 and 5 years ago. I am something of a night owl. Back in my early high school days, I'd stay up until 2 a.m. reading or watching movies or deciding that it was a good time to do homework. I came out of my room, put a mug in the sink after I finished my tea, and used my phone's flashlight to see, because I didn't want to wake my brother. The light was faint, but enough to see my reflection in the glass of the louvre and notice a pair of orange lights. I looked behind me thinking it's some kind of apparatus or kitchen appliance, but there was no light. I turned around, kind of crapping myself. The lights were closer, and I could see a faint, pale silhouette against the dark garden. I was kind of frozen in fear. All I could do was stare at these two hypnotic eyes of whatever was looking at me. It was almost like an animal's eyes, looking under a flashlight, but it had its own source. I was worried that any sudden moves would spook it or prompt some sudden movement from the creature. I was preparing myself to turn my back and Naruto run to my room, but was terrified it might chase me or come inside. As living in rural Australia, we don't really bother locking doors. No one breaks in. I felt we were staring at one another for the longest time, but it couldn't have been more than a few minutes, a minute and a half at tops. I counted to 3, bolted to my room, jumped into my bed and pulled the covers over my face. I remember this ringing in my ears from the adrenaline and shaking from fear. Quite frankly, I'm surprised I didn't pee myself. I had to sleep with my light on that night, and I regret not assessing how tall it was. All I can remember is a pale humanoid figure and those glowing eyes. A few months after this, I got up to open the curtains and louvres of my room to let the cool, dry season air in. I felt the shock again, seeing the same pair of orange eyes staring back at me. This time, behind a cluster of golden cane palms in the garden 15 meters from my window. This time I yelled in shock, startling the creature that sprang off into the night. Let me tell you how relieved I was that I didn't have to sprint to my room this time. I just had to leap into my bed. After this, I haven't seen anything like this again. This experience was pretty weird, and why I mentioned I have trouble sleeping. It could very likely just be my tendency to sleepwalk. On a couple of occasions I've woken up in the lawn beside my house. Not sure why, but it's an awfully daunting feeling to wake up outside on the ground, somewhere you don't remember falling asleep, and even worse with a small rock embedded in your arm. You know, like when it's been there for so long it just kind of sticks to your skin. I woke up because the rooster started going off. The sun had started to come up, but it was mostly dark still, and I went inside through the back door, which, by the way, was still open. I went to my room to resume sleep. The second time this happened was on the same lawn. I woke up startled because the sprinkler had started and I was sprayed. I felt this uncomfortable familiarity with the situation. I got up and went inside for my second shower of the day. I'd love to hear your thoughts on everything. Please, I want to understand. A few years back, while fishing on a large pond with my dad, we happened to see a few strange lights in the sky. We had a cheap pair of binoculars, so they didn't offer any help in visibility. The odd thing was that the area was very mountainous. Across from our location, there were 2 mountaintops, and each had a bright light seemingly hovering over them. They didn't move, grow, or shrink, just stayed a steady size and brightness. My dad the whole time kept fishing and drinking, while I kept a worrisome eye on them. I mean, last place I want to be is in the middle of a pond with aliens. Anyway, time passed and I can't remember if before or after, but at one point, a pointed ship flew across the pond. It was more centered on the pond than out in the distance like the orbs, and a while later it flew back the opposite way. Now here's the oddest part. Eventually the balls of light began to come towards us one last time. The first one made no noise whatsoever until it was over us. At that point it suddenly just looked and sounded like an airplane. It has never sat well with me that these were just planes flying towards us. I've seen plenty of planes in the sky at night and they make noise, move and aren't bright star color. Also, how they both managed to fly directly over our boat at so low altitude seems so odd. We weren't that close to any kind of airport. Side note, I did jokingly yell to someone fishing off our nearby dock if they were seeing this too. They agreed and could hear in their voice that they were unsettled by it also. I had a football coach back in high school who was also one of my teachers for a semester. He told us a story that freaked us out pretty bad. He had a coaching job at a small college in Montana when he was a lot younger and newly married. He said that after practice one evening, he was making his long commute home, and the route ran alongside just fields and rivers of hay, grain, and whatever. Since it was late summer/early fall, it wasn't even approaching dark yet. His car was an old beat-up pickup truck with just a bench seat. He's driving along when he sees a hitchhiker on the shoulder. This being back in the day, and in a small town in Montana, my teacher pulled over to let the guy in without a second thought. The man was described as wearing a really old, outdated style of suit. Not quite a zoot suit, but styled in a similar baggy way. He also had a big, stylish hat. This guy looked like he was straight out of the 40s and some sort of pimp. My teacher thought it was weird that he was so overdressed, it being so super hot, but maybe they were the only clothes he had. So the guy gets in next to my teacher without a word. My teacher asks him where he needs to go, and the guy just points forward, and my teacher drives on. Later, my teachers tried talking to the guy, just trying to make simple conversation, but the guy wouldn't speak or even acknowledge him. He just pulled his hat down like he was sleeping. Out of nowhere, the guy just tips up his hat, looks out the window and says, "Stop the car. Now." My teacher pulls over and lets him out, not wanting to offend a possibly crazy man. The guy stands on the side of the road for a second, and then, at a dead sprint, just runs off into the field beside the road until my teacher couldn't see him anymore. Granted, the crop was fairly tall. He waits for a while, thinking maybe the guy had the runs or something, and just didn't want to crap next to the road. After a long enough wait, my teacher gets back in the truck and starts to accelerate back on the road. The thing about really old trucks is they don't accelerate very fast. As my teacher got back on the road, he looks in his rearview mirror to check for a safe merge, but there wasn't a car in sight. What there was the hitchhiker, on all fours like an animal, running or crawling after the truck at an inhuman speed. Meanwhile, my teacher is beginning to fishtail as he attempts to go faster. The whole time his eyes are glued on the mirror watching the man chase after his car. Eventually he was able to get up to speed and lost sight of the guy in his mirror. When he was able to stop at a gas station to use a payphone, he called his wife at home to tell her the story and to lock up the house. She thinks he's just messing with her and says that he has been talking with her co-worker about the hitchhiker. When he asks why she would think that, she reveals that apparently at her office in town where she worked, one of her co-workers told her a story of the exact same thing happening to them, and it's a well-known urban legend in that town. She thought it was just folks playing with the new girl at work who had to drive home alone at night. My teacher assured her he wasn't lying, and she evidently believes him and can vouch for his side of the story, because she showed up to one of the fundraisers and I asked her about it. So yeah, I just avoid lonely roads in Montana. And a huge thank you to Andrew, who let me share this story. This event happened to me in 1998. I was driving along a one-way street that had 3 lanes. I was driving in the middle lane. I came to a traffic light that was red. I was 3 cars back in the line. To my left and closer to the lights, there's a sidewalk that's parallel to a driveway. And besides that driveway, a little shopping plaza. I looked towards the plaza, and there, on the back curve of the sidewalk, was a man. I looked curiously at him, because he was dressed in a black, business-like suit with a black tie, as well as a black rimmed hat, like a cowboy hat, with an accompanying black briefcase. It was about midday and very hot and sunny. I asked myself why he was just sitting there in the hot sun dressed like that. I'm wondering if he was a street person or beggar, but why would he have that suit on? Suddenly he turned his head and looked straight into my eyes and kept a steady stare. This made me feel uncomfortable and uneasy, quite creeped out. I was far back in the traffic. Why would he be staring at me like that? I looked away and backed as he was still staring at me. The light changed to green, and as I was driving by, he kept his stare on me. I drove off quickly and went home still thinking how weird that was and how creepy he made me feel. I told my husband about this weird man and he said, maybe he was waiting on someone. But why was he just standing there in the hot sun? Why not in the shade of the building, I thought. I went on with my day trying not to think about him. The next morning, my husband asked me to go to an electrical shop to buy an item. When he told me where to get it, I gasped. It was the same plaza where I saw the weird man. I told my husband that was the same plaza I saw the man in the suit, and if I went there and saw him, I wouldn't go in. My husband said not to go if I didn't feel comfortable, but for some reason, I needed to go and satisfy myself that he was just a man and not some supernatural being or something to that effect, and that I was just being silly. I arrived at the plaza, parked near to the door of the shop. The store was barely opening, so very few cars were parked there. I was able to look around. There was no one around and I didn't see the man anywhere. So I breathed a sigh of relief and felt better to enter the shop. The shop entrance had 4 steps up to the door. I stopped at the top and had another look around, but there was still no one other than the traffic moving along. Inside was a long counter, sort of like a bank with 4 windows to purchase items. I was the only customer. 2 windows were open beside each other with a sales representative at each. Behind the reps were 2 others working, moving around. Everyone looked at me, we all exchanged good mornings, and I went to the last window on the right. The door to the shop is now behind me and to my left. I was more relaxed now, as I ordered what I needed, and the representative sent another worker for the items, and she collected the payment for them. As I waited, I turned to look at the entrance door, and there, coming up the steps, was the man, wearing the same black suit, same hat, same briefcase in hand, and my heart nearly popped out my chest. I felt the blood rush to my face. Where did he come from? How did he get here so fast, and why is he even coming in here? He opened the door slowly and walked in. He walked towards me, staring straight at me. His eyes were dark, and I'm not sure if he was smiling or had no expression at all. I was just so frightened. He walked slowly over to the counter next to me and turned to face the window beside me. He had his head slightly down. The lady sitting at the window did not look up from what she was doing. He said nothing to her, simply stood there. As a matter of fact, no one even looked at him from behind the counter. I was frozen for what felt like a moment. I turned back to my cashier and used my peripheral vision to watch him. He just stood there facing the second lady. I wanted to ask if anyone else saw him, but was too frightened and couldn't speak. It seemed like forever that I was standing there, but I was sure it was just a few seconds. The man then started to slowly turn his head towards me. I was just about to run out the shop, leaving my items behind, when the cashier handed me a bag. I ran from the shop, looking behind me as I opened the door. He was slowly heading towards the door also. I ran down the steps, fumbled for my keys and got into my car as quickly as I could. I looked up at the shop doors as he exited. He was still staring at me with a grin, and I drove off as fast as I could. I looked behind me as I drove away and saw him still watching me as he walked down the steps. I do not know who, or what that was, or what he wanted, but I'm glad he didn't get into my car. I felt like that's what he wanted, to come with me. I avoided driving on that road for a very long time. I eventually drove past there with my husband at the wheel, but never saw the man in black. I have not been back to that shop or that plaza since, and it still gives me chills to this day. I've been searching for similar stories like this one on the Men in Black, but they're not the same. This was definitely creepy. Evil even. I've had several experiences, all around similar locations, within months of each other. The first one happened when I had just adopted my puppy. He was 11 weeks old and loved everyone. He would run up to anyone and everyone, tail wagging. The friendliest thing. One day we were out on a walk in a large open cow field behind where I lived at the time. It was dusk, and there wasn't really anyone else around, except this hiker in the distance walking towards us. My dog saw him and stopped in his tracks, got down low to the ground and just started growling. The hiker was still too far away for me to even make out his face, but my puppy was freaking out. As he got closer, I started to become seriously unnerved. He was pacing it towards us like a robot. That's the only way I can describe it, or like the way military people walk. He was pale white and had these dead eyes that seemed to not see us at all. There was no acknowledgement of us whatsoever. He just robo-sped walked straight in our direction. The dog was going crazy, growling, whining. I'd never heard him make those sounds before. When the hiker walked past me, I just felt this sense of dread hit me in the gut. It felt like evil. It was the single most terrifying encounter I've ever had. As he passed us, his eyes didn't move. It was as if he didn't even see us, even though the dog was growling at him. He just power walked past us and continued on. It was strange too, the direction he was going in, because all there was a giant hill, and it was getting dark. As soon as he made his way past us, me and the dog just broke into a run, as if we were both running for our lives. We ran all the way home. The next one happened in the same field. Again, I was walking the dog a couple of months after the first encounter. Again, just reiterating the point that he was the friendliest dog ever, especially as a pup. All he wanted to do was to run up to every stranger for pets. We're in this field, and there's a load of hikers with backpacks on, checking their maps. The puppy is checking them out, wagging their tails, when he zeroes in on one hiker lady who's standing still just observing a tree. He dropped to the ground and started growling and whining, just like last time. She didn't acknowledge us and just stared at the tree with her dead eyes. And she was pale again, super pale. And when I caught a glimpse of her face properly, I felt that same sense of dread as the last time. She looked fairly normal, except she had almost no nose. I know this sounds insane. She had slits, like someone who'd done too much cocaine and had their nose fall off. Even like Voldemort. I don't think the dog could have been growling at her appearance though, because her back was turned to us when the growling started. The third freaked me out the most. A friend and I were just leaving my house to walk the dog again, when we realized we'd forgotten something inside. Where I live, there's no car access, and it's considered the safest area ever, so the dog is usually free to roam around outside, saying hello to people on the path. We left him outside for a second while we went in, and when I came out, there was a man in a business suit standing completely still staring at my dog, and my dog was staring back at him, not growling this time, just very still. It was so weird. He wasn't looking at the dog like he was afraid of it, more like he'd never seen one before. It was a curious look. Also, the fact he was wearing a suit was wild, because I lived on a boat on the river. It's muddy and there are cows and dogs and stuff. It was just such a strange outfit to see someone in that location in. Almost as if someone was trying to play human and got that bit wrong. Anyway, so this stare-off went on for a good minute while my friend and I kind of observed from the doorway when he walked on, past the gate and into a field where the two other encounters occurred. We followed behind him because we happened to be going in the same direction. We followed him through the gate into the field and watched him veer off the path to our left, towards the hill that the first hiker was marching towards. We continued on straight with the dog, heading for the pub on the other side of the field, when we realized I'd forgotten my purse. I turned around to go back, But now the suit guy was back at the gate we'd all just come through. He was standing there staring at the gate, occasionally lifting the latch on it, as if he was inspecting it. It was super weird and creepy. What was he doing? He was just walking away and then turned around and came back to check that the gate mechanism was working properly. I decided not to return for my purse because I didn't want to have to walk past him again. The fourth experience happened in the same field a few months after, on a dog walk. My boyfriend was with me this time, but he told me to go ahead in the field while he finished getting ready, and that he'd meet me there. So Pup and I walked out into the field, and immediately spotted a hiker, robo-power walking towards us, as if he'd just come down from the hill. It wasn't the same guy as before, but it was the same kind of unsettling energy that I felt in my gut. It was wrongness, unease, and he was walking the exact same way. I pretended to chase my dog in the opposite direction and waited for him to pass through the gate before I got back onto the path. I watched him walk through it and disappear past the gate and down the path. Puppy and I carried on walking when about 2 minutes later, I felt like I needed to turn around. So I did, and there he was again, power walking towards us with those dead eyes. I literally felt my blood run cold. I've never been so terrified. He was going so fast and with such intensity that the dog and I just started running. I fumbled for my phone and tried to call my boyfriend, who didn't answer, and veered off the path, cut through the long grass and circled back to the gate in a giant arc. Creepy alien dude continues power walking up the path he'd just come down, as if he's gonna go back up the hill. Sweating and out of breath, I spotted my boyfriend finally walking up to join us, and ran to him, babbling about the weirdo hiker with the bad energy. He goes, "Where?" As I turned to point to him, we realized that he's now power walking backwards with his eyes locked on us, still heading back up the hill. Backwards. What? We were both seriously freaked out. These all happened in the summer. Come autumn, I was living alone on the boat with the dog while the boyfriend was away for work. One night around midnight, the dog and I were walking home from a pub quiz. It was always super dark on these country paths, and my phone had died, so I had no light and was literally crashing into hedges and trees trying to feel my way home by moonlight. And the moons and stars were super bright that night. Anyway, to get to my boat I have to cross over the river on a bridge. As I'm walking over the bridge, I was looking up at the stars as they were the only source of light. I ended up observing what I thought was a plane because it was moving steadily in my direction over that hill in that field where everything happened. As I'm watching it, it seemed to suddenly look at me. I don't know how to describe that. It's as if it suddenly realized it was being observed. I felt us connect, and it shot off to the left super fast and blinked out of existence. Obviously in my mind that's a UFO, and it's hovering over the hill where the creepy aliens kept appearing from. So now I was terrified, and I ran all the way home crashing into bushes like a crazy person because I couldn't see, locked the door, and hid under the covers like a kid. A month or so after that, my pup woke me up at 4 a.m. because he needed to go toilet. Half asleep, I went to open the door for him and let him outside. I just want to paint a picture so you understand how strange this is. I live on a boat on the river. Where my boat was moored was the middle of the countryside. There are no lights on at night. Not much light pollution, no street lights. It's pitch dark apart from the light of the stars and moon. So when I stuck my head out of the boat to call the dog back, and found myself being blinded by a white light, I was confused. I looked up at the sky and couldn't even open my eyes fully because it was so bright. It was light. This giant white mass really low in the sky, so low and bright I couldn't see anything else if I looked up. The dog came running back in, and I slammed the door shut, locked it, and went back to sleep. It was almost a "you didn't see anything" moment. I didn't even think anything at the time. Looking back, it makes no sense. I even went back to this spot recently to make sure that no other lights I missed were there, like a new lamppost or something. There aren't. I don't know what these mean, but I moved back onto land and away from that hill and field, and they stopped happening. I actually walked up to the top of that hill one morning to check it out, and it's just a pretty picnic spot, not an alien HQ. But if anyone has any ideas, let me know. This took place sometime in late 2017, near Winter Park, Colorado, at a family friend's cabin. The cabin is in a fairly remote place with few houses around. I've been there twice before, but wasn't with my family during this trip, as I live in California now. My family had spent the day sledding and came back to the cabin in the early evening. My parents and their friends were playing board games downstairs while my 3 siblings and their 2 friends were upstairs playing. So at some point, my mum notices that my younger sister isn't playing with the rest of the kids and asks my other sister where she is. She said that she had got into her room to listen to music, so my mother thought nothing of it. An hour or so goes by, and my mum still hasn't heard or seen my sister, which was unusual, as she generally wouldn't pass up to play with friends. She again asks my other sister where she is, and she says she's still in her room listening to music. So my mum checks the room to find that she wasn't there. Immediately my mum goes into a panic and starts screaming her name. No response. Everyone in the house starts searching all of the rooms in the house, but they can't find her anywhere. My mum then singles out my other sister and asks her why she had lied about my sister's whereabouts. She claimed she was being honest, and that she had been listening to music. It's been about 2 hours since anyone has seen my sister. My mum goes outside to see if she can find her, and upon going outside, my mum tells me about the most horrifying thing she's ever seen. My sister is inside our car with her face plastered to the window, wide-eyed, screaming. My mum said it was like a horror movie. Everyone had assumed she had somehow locked herself in the car. I'm not sure how a very intelligent 10-year-old girl locks herself in a car she's been in thousands of times, but I digress. Upon opening the door, my sister gets out, and my mum notices that she isn't behaving normally and appears to be in some kind of trance. They walk her inside and begin asking her questions about what had happened, but she doesn't respond to anything. She remains in this trance state for maybe an hour or 2, so my mother gives up and puts her to bed. In the morning, my sister appeared to be acting somewhat normal, but seemed to be shaken up. My mother asks her how she ended up being in the car, but she says she doesn't remember how she got there. She says she only remembered one thing. As she was locked in the car, she saw a man dressed in all black approached her. She said she was terrified and tried to exit the vehicle. Then the man in black came closer and told her that he would let her out, but she had to do something for him. He holds up what appeared to be a black rose to the window and tells her he wants her to come out so then he can give it to her. After this, my sister remembers nothing. After hearing this story, my mum goes outside to check the area around the car. To her astonishment, she sees a trail of footsteps going from the car out past the house into the surrounding forest. No one had been playing or walking around that area before then, according to my mum, so she seemed quite disturbed by the tracks. We still don't know what to think about this, but my mother said that the look on my sister's face in the car was sincerely terrifying. Not sure what actually happened that night, but the similarities of seeing a black figure and being in a trance-like state made me see a connection. If I'm not wrong, I believe Colorado is also a hotspot for missing 411 cases. Thankfully, my sister didn't become one of them, but maybe she saw something similar. to what others have seen before their disappearance. My mother and I like going for walks together, even if the weather isn't entirely the best. One autumn evening about 4 or 5 years ago, I would have been about 21 or 2, we decided to go for a walk on the local path in the Minnesota woods near our home. It was cloudy, a bit late in the evening, a little windy and just spitting rain, but we went anyway. As we walked at decent speed since it was quite chilly, when we noticed no one else was on the path, which we guessed was just due to the weather, and that was fine. The sun was also going down, and Minnesota is full of black bears. We came up on a side path with a pretty bridge to the side, and I wanted to go take some photos of us together on it, but my mother said she had a bad feeling deep in the pit of her stomach. There could be bears that way. We ought to stay on the main path, she said. I convinced her anyway, and we went to take a few pictures together, then got back onto the main path. We laughed about her bad feeling and brushed it aside. When we got back on the main path, we noticed a man dressed in all black, quite a way up the main path from us. His back was to us, so he was walking in the same direction we were, down the path. We hadn't seen him behind us at all prior to this, and he was walking fairly slowly. After a while, I noticed a break in the trees off the main path, one less marked and not meant for locals to go on. I knew if we were followed, we would be on a high hill overlooking the river that ran by the path. Again, I wanted to go, and again my mother's good mood was soured by a bad feeling. We went despite the terrible feeling she had. I had one at this point as well, but only a small nagging in the pit of my stomach. I suppose nerves, maybe brought on by my mother being so nervous herself. We walked up a ways until the trees cleared out, and it was a beautiful view. At this point, the nagging in my stomach got much worse, and I too immediately thought, there's a bear here, we're being watched. I scanned the woods around us, and a small movement caught my eye. A man in a blue jacket was standing just behind the tree line staring at us. Look, there's someone there. The man immediately took off like a flash of lightning, running in the direction that would take him deeper into the woods, not back to the path. My mum turned to see him as I pointed, following the movement with my finger. She didn't see him, but we both agreed at once that it was time to go back. We hurried back down towards the main path, but when we made it to the very edge of the trees and the main path, it was blocked by the man dressed in black who had been ahead of us before. He just stepped off the main path and was about to head to the same clearing where we'd been standing. When he saw us coming, he turned around on a dime, so fast I didn't see his face, and started walking hurriedly back in the same direction we'd seen before. We ran out of the path and got to the car, drove to the other end of the path where the man in black would be exiting, and saw him coming, but when he saw the car, he turned again and started walking in the other direction. We went back to the other side and waited, but he never showed up. To this day, I think those two men were conspiring, and that if we'd have stayed even a moment longer, we may have ended up in that river dead. I thank my gut feeling and always listen to it when it begins to gnaw inside me. Warning, and I suggest everyone else does too. I was introduced to UFO hunting by one of my grandmothers, who got my mum and I into it. She introduced us to Art Bell and Coast to Coast, who my mum hated, but I adored and picked up on my shortwave anytime I could. I still pick it up, and Midnight in the Desert when I can. One of my more memorable experiences was chasing a UFO. The night started off normal. Young teenage me didn't want to get a shower. Mum wanted me to get a shower, and a lot of PA arguing from the other room. So I finally get in the shower and my mum yells at me. I'm thinking she's telling me to get in the shower, and I yell back that I'm already in it. really rather annoyed, when she basically stands outside our bathroom and tells me to get dressed if I wanted to see a UFO. I bolted out of there, got dressed, and my mum's on the house phone with Grandma, mid-90s, so we had one cell phone. But it wasn't used that often, and tended to have limited minutes. My mum, siblings and I pack into our car and follow this strange bright white light through the desert and up to our grandma's house. We pile out, Grandma watching outside, and we all stand in the yard watching this one light move towards the eastern sky. As we're watching, a few more lights appeared above the eastern horizon. They all seemed to dance in pace up and down, movement no aircraft can produce. A few minutes pass and my siblings and I hear what sounds like an electric guitar scale come from my grandparents' cable box, not the TV itself but above it, and they had no other speaker. So we go inside and check it out, nothing interesting. Mum and Grandma follow us inside and wonder why we dashed. Then we told them about the scale. Discovered my sibling and I had heard it on and off key. Walked outside and the lights were all gone. Every single one of them. I know my earlier description sounds like it's nothing unusual, but it was. I live with a small, used-to-be commercial airport in the same area that the lights were in. I know the approach path of planes from observing them, and I could tell you that what I saw was no plane. And we still glimpse odd UFOs every once in a while. Nothing big, just nothing I can really identify. That was my most exciting experience, though. I was canvassing for work today and had a really strange encounter. I don't really believe in aliens on Earth or monsters, entities, or the like. But this afternoon I was going door to door with a co-worker when we happened upon a very strange man. He was fairly tall, of average build, light complexion with dark hair that stuck out at odd angles, but his eyes and mouth were just wrong somehow. The eyes were very large and unsettling in their intensity, making it very hard to keep eye contact, a problem that I don't typically have. The mouth had a sort of V shape with the middle on the top lip protruding too much downwards, and the sides of the top lip arching up as well, making the mouth seem off somehow. He was polite enough and seemed somewhat surprised, which is normal for door-to-door canvassing as no one is really expecting you or anything. He just kind of brushed us off quickly, and we went on our way. My co-worker was also thrown off by the guy and remarked that it was weird. When we were driving away later, I said, "He almost seems like he wasn't a person but an alien wearing a human suit that didn't have time to put it on properly." There was a feeling of wrongness about the whole thing that's hard to describe. I mean, I see all kinds of people on a daily basis, including odd and unusual folk, but they don't make me feel like I've stumbled into something strange the way that this guy did. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's installment of stories. I have been searching for Men in Black stories for 3 years or more, and well, I'm really glad that I finally got to put together this video. Starbucks one didn't go down that well, not very popular. Hopefully this one picks up a bit more traction and you guys actually like it. If you did, of course I'd love it if you told me. So yeah, I don't think we're going to be doing this one again for a while, at least not Men in Black, because the stories are just so incredibly hard to come by. I mean, 3 years and only 7 of these stories are really Men in Black. So, can you imagine? And this is from threads far and wide over Reddit. It's been a real treasure hunt just to get this video out. So I'm really happy that it's finally out here. I'd like to give a huge thanks as always to my members and patrons and my coffee supporters for your continued support. You guys are awesome. Thank you for supporting the channel. I have a big compilation of Stories in the Rain coming out tomorrow, usual time. So please be there to check that out. It'll be out Saturday and Sunday as well. Of course, it's not going anywhere. And ready for fresh content on Le Monday. Alright then guys. Don't forget I'm doing shorts too. I don't know if you guys got notified about them. I posted my first one yesterday, I think. And it'd be good to know if you guys are informed that they appear. Every time Vsauce uploads a short, I'm pretty sure I get a notification, but I don't know if you guys do, so I had to community post my own short just to see if anyone would watch it. Not really sure on how they work, but I'm planning on making a few more in any case. Alright then guys, stay awesome and I'll see you in the next one.